Prepare for another chilling chapter in The Apprentice and the Hunter, Dark Forces Unleashed. In this episode, Gabriel and Ethan embark on a dangerous ghost hunt as they confront a tormented spirit, a mother searching endlessly for her lost child. Her grief has transformed into a dark force. Hit that subscribe button and ring the bell for more episodes filled with supernatural confrontations. New episodes weekly. Stay tuned for the next battle between light and darkness. On a quiet night, Gabriel and Ethan were in their secretive workshop, preparing tools for their next mission. The room was dimly lit, the air filled with a faint scent of incense. Strange items were spread out on the table: salt, candles, and a wooden dagger inscribed with ancient runes. Gabriel held a cross that glowed faintly, exuding a sense of calm and power, while Ethan carefully polished an old silver mirror nearby. Suddenly, the sound of a phone ringing pierced the silence, sharp and urgent. Gabriel calmly answered the call. On the other end was a mother, her voice trembling with fear and desperation. "You're Gabriel, right? Please, you have to save my son." Her words were filled with terror, as though something dreadful had overtaken her. The mother quickly explained her situation. A few days ago, her son had been playing with friends when he suddenly collapsed, his eyes vacant as though something had scared him beyond reason. Since that moment, he had fallen into a deep, unresponsive state, and despite the doctor's best efforts, there was no explanation. She believed it was a matter of his soul, not a medical issue. "I can feel that he's still alive, but his eyes, it's like his soul has left his body." Gabriel's expression turned serious. "We've dealt with cases of soul detachment before, but this time, I sense a deeper force at work." Turning to Ethan, he said, "Get ready. We need to head to the location immediately." Ethan quickly packed the necessary exorcism tools into a bag, gathering the essentials from the table. By the time they arrived at the mother's house, the night had deepened, and the air carried a sharp chill. Even the few people still walking the streets seemed to be moving quickly, as if the cold night held some unseen threat. The mother was waiting at the door, her face lined with anxiety and exhaustion, her eyes shadowed from lack of sleep. She led Gabriel and Ethan inside, where the atmosphere felt unnaturally quiet. Every step she took seemed to weigh heavily on her, as if she could collapse under the strain at any moment. She guided them to her son's room, and as the door swung open, Gabriel immediately felt a strong, oppressive force wash over him. The air inside was almost suffocating, as though some invisible presence was coiled tightly around the room, gripping everyone's chest. Ethan shivered involuntarily, sensing a creeping fear moving up his spine. Lying on the bed was a boy, his face pale, his eyes closed, his breathing shallow but steady. Everything appeared normal. But Gabriel knew the stillness was just an illusion. The real problem was lurking somewhere beyond sight. The mother's voice was almost pleading. "I can feel him. I know he's still here. His soul. It has to be here. Please help us." Gabriel nodded slowly, scanning the room. The decor seemed ordinary enough, but he quickly noticed certain oddities. The family photos on the walls seemed unnaturally dark, and a shell wind chime hung by the window, tinkling faintly in a breeze that didn't exist, as if it was whispering a hidden story. "There's something wrong with this house," Gabriel murmured to Ethan. He could sense this wasn't just a simple case of soul detachment. There was a far more powerful force at work behind it all. As they entered the boys' room, Gabriel's instincts immediately detected a force from another realm. This was no simple soul detachment. There was something far more complex and ominous at play, a deep energy filling the room with an unsettling tension. Gabriel walked slowly around the room, carefully observing every piece of furniture and decoration. His eyes stopped on the shell wind chime hanging by the window. The chime, which appeared to be an ordinary decoration, was emitting a strange, chilling sound. The eerie clinking of the shells seemed to shiver through the air, even though the window was closed and no wind was blowing. "Why is this here?" Ethan asked, his voice tinged with unease. As Gabriel's assistant, Ethan had seen his fair share of paranormal events, but the energy in this room was making him particularly tense. Shell wind chimes can attract spirits, especially those that are lost or wandering, Gabriel explained. He approached the chime, gently touching it. The clinking immediately ceased. This is not something you normally see in cases like this. It's likely that an external force has been drawn here by this. Gabriel turned to the mother. Who put this wind chime up? The mother hesitated before replying. I brought it back from a trip. The guide said that shell wind chimes could bring good luck, so I thought it would help the house. Gabriel frowned slightly. Sometimes, using objects like these without understanding them can attract things you don't want. He continued his inspection of the room, finding other disturbing details. The family photos on the walls seemed to warp in the dim light, as if the figures inside were watching them from the shadows. Toys on the boy's desk made faint sounds, as though invisible fingers were lightly brushing against them. There's more at play here than just the boy's trapped soul, Gabriel said grimly. A stronger entity is interfering. We're dealing with an external spirit. Gabriel began placing protective wards around the room, carefully sprinkling holy water in the corners. He then took out the silver mirror, a tool that could reveal hidden spirits. He was preparing to conduct a deeper investigation into what was lurking in the room. This is about to get complicated, Gabriel warned Ethan. Be ready for whatever comes. With protective charms set in place, Gabriel and Ethan lit the sacred candles. The dim light in the room grew even darker, the flickering flames dancing wildly, seemingly influenced by an unseen force. Gabriel raised the silver mirror, angling it toward the boy's bed, allowing the faint glow of the candles to reflect on its surface. Slowly, shadowy images began to emerge in the mirror. Ethan's eyes widened as he saw a blurry figure take shape in the reflection. It appeared to be the form of a woman, her features indistinct, her body surrounded by a swirling, dark mist as though she were struggling against some invisible force. What is that? Ethan whispered, his voice filled with both fear and curiosity. Gabriel's gaze remained fixed on the mirror, his expression calm yet alert. It's the place where the boy's soul is trapped. Another spirit is keeping him from returning. Gabriel could feel the spirit's sorrow and anger, and he knew there was a deeper story behind it. Suddenly, the figure in the mirror changed, its movements becoming erratic. The shadowy woman let out a piercing scream, and the temperature in the room plummeted. The shell wind chime, though still unmoved by any real wind, began to rattle violently, emitting a high-pitched, unnerving sound. Ethan felt a cold draft sweep over him, like something unseen was approaching from behind. There's a spirit in here, Gabriel called out, grabbing the cross from the table as the silver mirror in his hand grew hotter, indicating the presence of a powerful force. At that moment, the room's lights began to flicker wildly. The air grew heavier, pressing down on them like an invisible weight, making it harder to breathe. Ethan's chest tightened as though some unseen hand was squeezing the air out of his lungs. Don't move. Stay calm, Gabriel commanded, stepping closer to Ethan, his cross glowing faintly as it cast a warm light that momentarily pushed back the dark energy in the room. As the cross glowed brighter, the figure in the mirror vanished, and the oppressive atmosphere in the room lightened. But Gabriel knew this was far from over. The spirit hadn't left. It was merely retreating. The situation was more complex than he had anticipated. This wasn't just a matter of a detached soul. There was a deeper, hidden secret buried here, waiting to be uncovered. The air remained thick with tension even after the wind chime had stopped its eerie ringing. Though the oppressive energy in the room had eased, a lingering sense of unease still gripped the space. Gabriel's brows furrowed, and a flicker of confusion crossed his face. He sensed something far more powerful and malevolent than a simple soul detachment. This was no ordinary spirit. This spirit is filled with deep resentment. It's not going to let go easily, Gabriel murmured. He knelt beside the boy's bed, placing his hand gently on the child's forehead and closing his eyes. He began to focus, trying to sense where the boy's soul might be. Ethan stood nearby, his eyes scanning the room, every slight movement heightening his nerves. Time seemed to stretch in the room, the only sound the faint crackling of the burning candles. Gabriel's breathing deepened as he concentrated, and beads of sweat appeared on his brow. His expression grew darker, and suddenly his eyes snapped open. There was a newfound intensity in his gaze. "The boy's soul isn't just trapped," Gabriel said grimly. "Something is actively preventing it from returning. And it's connected to another spirit." He stood, his tone filled with warning. "We need to find this other spirit. It's at the root of all this." The mother stood at the door, her hands clasped tightly together, clearly afraid to interrupt but desperate for answers. Her eyes reflected the same fear and hope she had carried for days. "What spirit? Why is it stopping my son?" she asked, her voice trembling as she tried to comprehend Gabriel's explanation of these complex supernatural forces. Gabriel turned to her, his voice steady but serious. "We don't know its identity yet, but I'm certain it's connected to your family or this house. This spirit is likely tied to a great deal of pain, war, suffering, perhaps even death. And your son's soul has somehow fallen under its control." Ethan moved to the window, opening it slightly to let in some fresh air, though the chill outside only added to the eerie atmosphere. He turned back to the mother, asking, "Does this house have any particular history? Anything unusual that might have happened here?" The mother hesitated for a moment, as though dredging up a memory she didn't want to believe was real. Slowly, she replied, "My grandmother once told me that this land was used as a refuge during the war. Families sought shelter here as they fled the fighting, but many of them never made it back." Gabriel's expression grew more serious. "The remnants of war. Painful, unresolved spirits. This is starting to make sense." Later that night, Gabriel and Ethan returned to their workshop to process what they had learned. The spirit they had encountered was more than just a wandering soul. It carried with it deep grief and unfulfilled desires, but they still lacked enough information to fully understand its motivations. Suddenly, the phone rang again. It was the mother, her voice uncertain. "Gabriel, I need to tell you something strange. It might be related to my son's condition." Gabriel listened closely as she continued. "For a while now, I've been having these strange dreams. In the dreams, I see a mother and her child running through a war zone, but they get separated. The mother searches frantically for her child, but before she can find him, she's shot by soldiers. Even as she dies, she's thinking of her child. Her soul leaves her body and continues searching, but she can never find him." Her voice began to break. In the dream, the mother sees her child alone at a train station, cold and starving, until he dies. But she's powerless to help him. "Every time I have this dream, I wake up in pain, like I've lived through it myself. I always thought it was just my mind worrying about my son. But now I think it's somehow connected to the spirit." Gabriel frowned, deep in thought. "You're saying these dreams started before your son fell into a coma?" "Yes," she replied. "I didn't think much of them at first, but now that I've seen what you're dealing with, the dream feels too similar to ignore." Gabriel's suspicion grew. The mother's dreams were not a coincidence. They were likely a connection to the spirit haunting her home. The spirit was using her dreams to communicate its own pain. The mother's child had become a substitute for the spirit's lost one, and the dreams were a reflection of the spirit's long-buried trauma. Ethan leaned in, speaking quietly to Gabriel. "Do you think these dreams are the spirit's actual memories? That she lost her own child, and now she's still searching?" Gabriel nodded slowly. "It's very possible. Her grief and anger are so intense that they've bled into the real world, reaching out to this mother. She's trying to fill the void left by the child she lost." The two men continued analyzing the dream. The train station mentioned in the dream caught Gabriel's attention. The station could be where her soul shattered. She watched her child die there and couldn't help him. "That's where we need to go." "So, you think the dream is the spirit's true past?" Ethan asked, his unease growing. "Yes, it must be her final memory before death. Her anguish is so great. She's trapped in those last moments. We need to go to where this happened and find her child's soul." The mother's voice came through again, filled with uncertainty. "I've never been to a train station like that, but the dream, It's so vivid. I believe it has something to do with my son." Gabriel knew that this was the key to uncovering the spirit's origin. The dream was the reflection of the spirit's tragic past, and the train station was likely the place where it all went wrong. The next morning, Gabriel and Ethan returned to the house, the oppressive atmosphere still lingering in the air. The mother's dreams had confirmed Gabriel's suspicions. The malevolent spirit's agony was rooted in a tragic past, and the train station from the dream might hold the key to breaking the spirit's hold on the boy. As they stepped into the room once again, Gabriel decided it was time to directly confront the spirit. He needed to perform a summoning ritual to establish a clearer connection with the lost soul. If the memories in the mother's dream were true, the spirit might be compelled to reveal more about its torment. Ethan closed the windows and lit the sacred candles again, the faint glow casting long shadows across the room. Gabriel set up protective symbols and wards around the boy's bed, then took out his brass bell and silver mirror, ready to invoke the spirit. With a soft chime of the bell, the room's temperature dropped sharply. The candle flames began flickering wildly as Gabriel started chanting ancient incantations. The air grew heavier, a sense of pressure filling the room as if something was slowly being drawn in from another realm. Suddenly, a figure began to form in the mirror. At first, it was just a blurred silhouette, but it gradually sharpened, revealing a woman's face. Her features were twisted in sorrow, her form distorted, as though she were caught in an endless cycle of grief. Ethan gripped the bottle of holy water tightly, his voice low and tense. "What are you seeing?" "It's her," Gabriel replied, his eyes locked on the mirror. The mother's spirit. The woman's reflection in the mirror didn't speak, but her face told a story of intense pain and helplessness. Her hands reached out as if searching for something. Gabriel realized she was reaching for her child. As the image flickered and shifted, the spirit's memories seemed to play out like a film. The mother, clutching her child's hand as they fled down a war-torn road, panic and confusion written on her face. In the chaos, they were separated, her child swept away by a crowd. The mother screamed for him, but her cries were drowned out by the roar of gunfire. She lost her child, Ethan whispered, sympathy filling his voice. That's what's driving her pain. The scene in the mirror shifted once more, showing a desolate train station. The mother's spirit stood on the platform, watching as her child sat alone, hungry and weak. She reached for him, but there was nothing she could do. She was no longer part of the physical world, just a lost soul, helpless to save her son as he slowly wasted away. Gabriel studied the scene intently, then lowered the bell and stopped the chanting. "The dream was real," he said grimly. "These are her memories. She lost her child and watched him die, unable to help. The anguish of it kept her spirit from finding peace." Ethan frowned, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. Then why is she so attached to the boy? Why can't she let go? She's trying to fill the void left by her own child's death. His soul represents a second chance for her. She can't bear to let another child slip away. Ethan nodded, understanding the complexity of the situation. The spirit wasn't purely malevolent. It was driven by an overwhelming sense of grief and loss. She couldn't let go of her love for her child, and that pain had transformed her into the tormented entity that now haunted the house. After the summoning ritual, Gabriel and Ethan knew they had to visit the train station from the mother's dream. It was the place where her soul had shattered, where she had watched her child die, unable to intervene. If they could find her son's lost soul and reunite them, it might bring the spirit peace at last. With the mother's guidance, Gabriel and Ethan drove to the abandoned train station. Once a key wartime transit hub, it had long since fallen into disrepair. The tracks were rusted, weeds and overgrown shrubs covering the platform. The station itself was eerily quiet, with only the faint whistle of the wind breaking the silence. They stepped onto the platform, the cold air biting at their skin. Gabriel could feel the presence of lingering spirits, their energies heavy with unresolved pain. "This is the place," Ethan said quietly, looking around. "It hasn't been touched in years." Gabriel lit a sacred candle and placed it at the center of the platform, then began chanting the incantation to summon the spirit again. This time, they weren't just looking for the mother. They needed to find her child's soul and reunite them. As the chant deepened, the air grew colder still, and the wind picked up, howling through the broken windows of the station. Then, from the distance, a faint sound echoed. A child's cry, fragile and filled with despair. The sound grew closer, and when Ethan turned toward the tracks, he saw the ghostly figure of a young boy standing near the rusted rails. His face was pale, his eyes hollow and lost. "That's her child," Gabriel said softly, his heart heavy with empathy. The boy's spirit wandered aimlessly, his small hands clutching at the air as though searching for something familiar, something safe. Gabriel approached slowly, speaking in a calm voice. "You don't have to be afraid. We're here to help. We're going to bring you back to your mother." As the boy's spirit turned toward them, a shadowy figure materialized on the other side of the platform. It was the mother's spirit, her face twisted in anguish, her hands reaching out toward her son. But there was something more than sorrow in her movements, a desperation that had turned to rage. She let out a bone-chilling wail and lunged toward the boy, trying to pull him back into her grasp. Ethan stumbled backward, but Gabriel remained calm, drawing a line of salt across the platform and pouring holy water in a circle around them. "She's trapped in her own pain," Gabriel said, his voice steady. "We need to show her that she can still find peace." Gabriel stepped forward, holding the cross in one hand as he tried to reach the mother's spirit. "Your child is here. You've waited so long for this moment. It's time to let go of the pain. You've both suffered enough." But the spirit of the mother didn't seem to understand. She continued to pull at her child's soul, as though afraid she might lose him again. The cold, biting air cut across the platform like knives, the wind howling in its fury. Gabriel realized that mere words wouldn't be enough. Her grief was too powerful, her rage too deep. He would need to use a stronger ritual to break the cycle of pain and bring the two spirits together. He quickly lit more sacred candles, placing them in a circle around the spirits. The symbols he had drawn began to glow as he recited the ancient words of a purification ritual. "You've already lost enough time," Gabriel said to the mother. "But now you can find peace. All you need to do is let go." The boy's spirit stepped forward, his small hand reaching out toward his mother. There was a moment of hesitation. Then, slowly, the mother's hand trembled, as if unsure of what to do. Finally, she reached out, her fingers barely brushing against her son's. The boy gave her a small, comforting smile, as if to tell her, "It's okay. I'm not afraid anymore." At that moment, the mother's spirit broke. The years of resentment, anger, and grief melted away, and her body returned to its natural form. Her face softened, and tears welled up in her ghostly eyes. She fell to her knees, embracing her son's spirit, as both of them began to glow with a warm, gentle light. For the first time in decades, mother and child were together again. Mother and child stood enveloped in the soft glow of their reunion, as though the entire world was bearing witness to their final moment of peace. Gabriel stood by, watching as the sacred candles flickered gently, their flames stabilizing as the oppressive energy around the station lifted. The mother's face, once contorted with grief, was now calm and serene. Her son's spirit smiled up at her, his expression full of the innocence and warmth that had been lost to the cruelty of the world. It was as though, in this moment, they had returned to the time before the war, before their lives had been torn apart. Ethan wiped at his eyes, moved by the raw emotion of the scene. The bond between the mother and her child had transcended death and time, and now, after so much suffering, they had found peace. "They're free now," Ethan said quietly, his voice filled with awe and reverence. Gabriel nodded, though his eyes remained focused on the spirits. The final moments of a soul's release were always the most delicate. Any disruption could cause the spirits to lose their way again. He watched closely as the glowing symbols on the ground continued to protect their journey to peace. The mother's spirit whispered something to her son, though no words could be heard. It was as though she was saying her final goodbye, acknowledging the end of their suffering. The boy's spirit glowed brighter as he reached for her hand. The two souls began to merge into one, their forms dissolving into pure light. And then, with a final, gentle sigh, they disappeared, leaving the platform empty and quiet once more. The oppressive atmosphere had completely lifted. The biting cold that had hung in the air for so long was gone, replaced by a stillness that felt comforting. Gabriel knew the decades of pain had finally ended. The mother and her child had been freed. Ethan took a deep breath, wiping away the last of his tears. I never thought souls could carry so much pain. Even after death, they're still searching for each other. Gabriel placed a comforting hand on Ethan's shoulder. That's why we do what we do. It's not just about fighting evil. It's about helping lost souls find their way to peace. Ethan nodded, understanding the deeper meaning behind Gabriel's words. They were not just hunters. They were protectors and saviors of lost souls. The two of them left the abandoned train station behind, carrying the weight of their mission's completion back to the house. The task was done, but there was still one final thing they needed to verify. As they entered the house, the atmosphere felt noticeably lighter. The oppressive feeling that had once filled the space was gone, replaced by an air of calm. The cold edge had vanished, and the room felt almost peaceful. Lisa, the mother who had sought their help, sat at her son Michael's bedside, her eyes filled with anxious hope. She looked utterly exhausted, but the love for her child still shone through in her gaze. Gabriel and Ethan stepped quietly into the room. Lisa immediately stood up, her voice trembling with anticipation. Will he wake up? Gabriel moved to the boy's side, his gaze lingering on Michael's face. Gently, he placed his hand on the boy's forehead, closing his eyes as he reached out to sense the child's soul. A few moments passed in silence before Gabriel exhaled deeply and gave a nod of reassurance. His soul has returned to his body. You can relax now. He's safe. Lisa's eyes filled with tears, her hands covering her mouth in disbelief. He's really back? He's going to wake up? Just as the words left her lips, Michael's fingers twitched ever so slightly. Lisa froze, staring down at him in shock. Slowly, the boy's eyelids fluttered, and then, after what felt like an eternity, he opened his eyes. His gaze was unfocused at first, but when he saw his mother, a faint smile touched his lips. "Mom," his voice was soft and weak, but it was enough to fill the room with a sense of life returning. Lisa let out a sob of joy and immediately knelt beside him, wrapping her arms around him and holding him tight. "You're awake. You're really awake. I've been waiting for you to come back." Ethan stood to the side, watching the reunion with a mixture of awe and relief. This mission had gone beyond a mere exorcism or spirit removal. It had become a true act of salvation, a moment of deep healing and redemption. He took a deep breath, letting the weight of the experience settle in, then turned to Gabriel. "We did it." Gabriel smiled softly, a calm satisfaction in his voice. "We did more than save the child's life. We freed his mother as well." Her love for him kept her going, even through the darkest moments. Though Michael was still weak, he had clearly regained his senses. He looked over at Gabriel and Ethan, his eyes filled with gratitude, though he likely didn't fully understand what had happened. With what little strength he had, he nodded to them, a silent thank you. Gabriel knelt down beside the boy, his hand resting gently on his head. "Rest now. The danger has passed. Everything is going to be all right." Lisa wept tears of joy as she continued to hold her son, overwhelmed by the return of her child after such a terrifying ordeal. Her gratitude toward Gabriel and Ethan was immeasurable. "I don't even know how to thank you. You saved my son. You saved our family." Gabriel's voice was kind, but firm. "There's no need for thanks. This is what we do. He's safe now. All he needs is time to recover. And so do you." Ethan watched the scene unfold, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. This job wasn't just about fighting evil. It was about giving people hope, restoring families, and helping those who had lost everything. It was about light in the face of overwhelming darkness. Gabriel stood and turned toward the door, signaling to Ethan that their work here was done. As they made their way out, Ethan paused to glance back at the mother and her child. Seeing them reunited brought him a sense of peace unlike anything he had experienced before. "This time, we didn't just save a child," Ethan said softly. "We saved her faith, too." Gabriel nodded, placing a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Remember, our job is not only to fight spirits. It's to help those trapped in their pain find their way back." The night had deepened by the time they left the house, but the air was no longer heavy with dread. Instead, a quiet calmness surrounded them, a sign that their mission had been completed. Though they knew there were still mysteries and challenges ahead, for now, they could savor this small victory. Night had fully fallen as Gabriel and Ethan walked down the quiet street. The task was done, the child had been saved, and the mother's hope restored. Yet, despite the sense of completion, Gabriel's expression remained serious. He looked out toward the distant horizon, his voice low and thoughtful. "Every time we help a soul find peace, the shadows seem to follow close behind." Ethan remained quiet for a moment, sensing there was more to Gabriel's words. "So, this isn't over, is it?" Gabriel shook his head slightly. "No, there are bigger challenges ahead. Darker forces are gathering." Ethan took a deep breath, bracing himself for what might come next. "Whatever it is, I'm ready. I'll face it with you." As they continued down the road, the darkness ahead felt thick with possibilities, as if another mission was quietly waiting for them. Their steps echoed in the stillness, leading them toward the unknown challenges that lay ahead. But no matter how deep the darkness became, they would walk it together, always ready, always moving toward the next soul that needed saving. Thank you for watching this episode of The Apprentice and the Hunter, Dark Forces Unleashed. We truly appreciate your time and support. Your feedback and engagement mean the world to us, and we hope you enjoyed this journey into the supernatural as much as we enjoyed bringing it to you. If you loved the story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and remember, the light will always prevail over the darkness. See you in the next episode.